I started attending a Calvary Chapel in Downey, California during what I now kind of half jokingly, half seriously call the Don't Miss the Rapture 70s. And so I became aware that there was such a thing as Christian music. I had no idea. At the time, I was working at a record store here in Southern California called Licorice Pizza. Now, that means nothing, but if you're kind of, loaded and it's the 70s, you go, hey, that vinyl album looks like a Licorice Pizza. So I worked there along with my best friend in this world, a guy named Dan Ruppel, who founded a comedy team called Isaac Air Freight. And so we had found out about this we didn't even know what to call it then, but just this music that had, was faith set to music. So we started ordering all these albums into the store. So what happened is we wound up having a better Christian music section in the store than even the Bible bookstore down the street. I mean, we had everything you could order because we were motivated and interested. So we had all these albums that came into the store. And they had a policy at the time to prevent, employee theft. And you could check out 5 albums from the store and take them home and listen to them and then bring them back and throw them in the defect pile. And so, because it was a big chain and that was okay. So Dan and I started taking albums home and listening to Second Chapter of Acts and Phil Keaggy, Larry Norman, Randy Stonehill, Randy Matthews, Karen Lafferty, Eric Nelson, Mustard Seed Faith, and of course, Love Song. Now, the reason that we knew to order Love Song into the store is that at that time, I was so brand new to everything, I started attending a musicians fellowship at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, that was led by Malcolm Wild. Malcolm Wild was half of the duo Malcolm and Alwyn, and while Love Song was busy inventing this thing over here in the States, they were kind of inventing it over in England. So Malcolm came over to go on staff, and he led a musicians fellowship on Sunday afternoons. So a bunch of musicians are gathered into a room. Talk about your challenging congregation, and we want to serve the Lord, but we also kind of want to be famous in Jesus' name. All that stuff is thrown in there together, And that's how I'd heard about Love Song and the different Maranatha artists at the time. Was going to church, listening to people talking to other musicians, and so that's basically how they got on my radar. When I first dropped the needle down on a Love Song album, it became very, very clear that this was the musical language that I wanted to hear. They were speaking the language that I was familiar with. And then, there were 2 things. As a brand new Christian, I'm just jumping up and down over hearing what they're singing about. I want to know as much about this as I possibly can. But even at that young age, as a card-carrying musician, I'm thinking, these guys are really good. They're not just like, it's okay in church good. They're really good. And they just, they kind of had me at hello, as it were. I think it's kind of self-evident that Love Song had a terrific impact on everybody that came later, all the guys who wanted to do what they were doing. It's funny because all these years later, because I've lasted this long, I get lumped in with them. But that's not really true. I was kind of their kid brother, like, hey, I write songs. Can I do this too? But that's not really the case. And so, in concerts that were being hosted by Calvary Chapel and many other places, and on the turntable, guys like me were being taught, this is how you do this, and this is how you do it really well. And so, I got to sort of step in line behind them. They had already been there and done that by the time I came on the scene. I'd heard stories about crazy tours, and 2 and 3 concerts a day, and the Philippines, and all these amazing stories. I mean, this stuff was circulating among all the guys who were talking about music and talking about music ministry. These were the stories that we knew. 2 Hands, is a classic. I mean, you cannot hear that song and not do 2 things all at once. Remember where you were when you first heard it and what you felt like, and then also fast forward that song into the present age and say, this is still a song that tells me what my life is to be about. That it's not just, I just didn't put my life on cruise control and wait for heaven to come, but I've got work to do in Jesus' name. The other song that I have a real affection for is A Little Country Church. And partly because of the song itself, but partly because a few years ago, Billy Batstone and Alex McDougall and I recorded a version of that song. And we, presumptuously perhaps in the view of some, I wrote kind of an updated verse at the end of the song. And it mentioned, even though it's been so long, Papa Chuck, he's still going strong. I wanted to make sure that kind of got in there. So a very cool thing is, just not more than about 5-6 months before Pastor Chuck passed away, I was able to go into his office and visit with him and play him that song and the little updated verse that we did. And so that will forever be a cherished memory. And again, I wasn't trying to steal anything or, put myself in the footnote of Love Song's history or something. It just seems like a wonderful, fun thing to do as we were covering these songs. I think if someone came and asked me, and believe me, that pool of people is shrinking all the time, but if somebody came and asked me, what did you learn from Love Song and what can be passed along to those who are coming up behind us? And forgive me if this answer may say more about me than it does about them, but I think one of the things that Love Song did so well was to not only weave the scriptures into song, but to tell stories. They were songs that were about our lives. And when you heard those stories, you not only heard the stories they were telling, but it made you introspective about your own story and about your own place in God's story. And I think that type of song is not as much the coin of the realm these days as I think it was back when we were coming up. And my argument is, let's project the lyrics on the screen, let's sing the phrases, let's worship. There's nothing wrong with that. How foolish would I be to say, let's not do worship music? But my idea is also to say to any young Christian musician, your artistic mandate is the broadest. You can also write story songs and songs of testimony and songs of observation in the way that Love Song did so well. You can grab onto that mantle and you can carry that deep into the 21st century. You have permission to do that. Back in the 90s, there was a large gathering at the Anaheim Convention Center, and a lot of the bands that you would expect to see from the Jesus music era were there. Many of the Maranatha bands that I first came in contact with and listened to their music and then was fortunate enough to become friends. And Love Song was there. And I wandered back into the green room, and I was just there as a civilian. I was there to hear them sing. And as I was wandering around, I ran into Chuck Girard. And Chuck said something to me that I will never forget, because it was one of the nicest things that he could have said. I don't even know if he remembers it. But I just said hello to him, and he said, "Hey, why aren't you up there?" Now, that did two things. Now, let's be honest. I didn't belong up there because that was not my graduating class. I was the younger brother, et cetera, et cetera. But just to say that phrase, to me, meant I see you as being the guy who has come up along behind us and is doing the same thing in the same way. In other words, I don't mean to make too much of it, but it felt a little bit like a one-sentence endorsement to me. And, that's a pretty good day. It's a pretty good day